Hi, I'm Patrick Cobb with AARP South Carolina. We're pleased to be a sponsor of the Charleston Post and Courier's Pints and Politics series. AARP is a nonprofit organization, so we don't endorse candidates. For more information, go to aarp.org/SC.
Hello, welcome to our virtual Pints and Politics. It's noon on a Wednesday. You're probably sitting at your computer or looking at your phone, and you might think you're in this alone, but let me tell you, we had 700 people RSVP for this event today. I'm Autumn Phillips. I'm the managing editor of the Post and Courier. This is an exciting day for us. We're here in Columbia at River Rat Brewery. We launched today the first print edition of the Post and Courier in Columbia. We have this out for free at 600 locations around Columbia where you usually find the free times. Well, I won't pull it out, but inside is a copy of the free times. We are working on setting up home delivery in the Columbia area for this product, so stay tuned. Today we have Jaime Harrison with us, who is the Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate. Before we start, I want to pause to thank AARP South Carolina, who has generously sponsored this series of Pints and Politics through the 2020 election season. Now I'm going to turn it over to, behind me, Skylar Croft, our political editor, who works out of our Charleston office, and Jamie Lovegrove, one of our 13 journalists working out of the Columbia newsroom. Thanks for being here.
All right, thanks for joining us, Jamie. It's good to see you again.
It's good seeing you, Jamie. Good seeing you, Skylar.
The big news this morning is that the Cook Political Report has changed their rating of the South Carolina Senate race from lean Republican to a toss-up. Started as a solid Republican, moved to likely, lean. Now it's a toss-up at this point. We've seen a number of public polls that show this race is neck and neck, when a year ago you were down by double digits. How did we get to this point in your mind? And as we go into these last 4 weeks of the race, what are you going to need to do to actually push it over the top?
Well, listen, in my mind, we've always been a toss-up. I started this race knowing that we would be well-positioned in order to win it. I've been doing this now here in South Carolina, doing politics since I was 16 years old. And one of the things that you learn in observing politics over the years is that old adage from Tip O'Neill that all politics are local. And it was an old adage, but it still rings true because it's about making sure that you're talking about the issues that people really care about, that you're addressing their hopes, their aspirations, and their fears. And, I came into this as someone who had tremendous respect for Lindsey Graham, who thought very highly of him. I thought that Lindsey Graham was a statesman who could rise above the political fray and really do what was in the best interest of our state and our nation. But Lindsey has changed over the past few years. And that old Lindsey Graham, I call that Lindsey Graham 1.0, it's very different than the guy that I'm running against now, and that's Lindsey Graham 2.0. And so what we will continue to do and what we have done from day one is focus on the issues that people care about here in South Carolina. Lindsey wants to be relevant in Washington, D.C. I want to be relevant in the lives of the people here in South Carolina. Because in the end of the day, it's the people in South Carolina who elect you to be their senator, not those folks in D.C.
There's been a lot of commercials, ads, buys. But there was one line from one of your earlier commercials that really stood out to me. It was, I think you were talking about your grandparents, and when you left, they would force you to take a tinfoil wrap.
It wasn't forced, Skylar. You would want to take one.
That's what I was going to ask you. Where did that come from, and what was usually in that plate?
Well, my grandma, my family didn't have a whole lot of money, all right? And so I have often said this. My grandmother had an 8th grade education. My grandfather had a 4th grade education. My grandma had to pick cotton. She worked in textile plants. She did domestic work. She cleaned up houses. My grandfather did construction. And so, our dinners were not very fancy, but on Sundays, that is when the fine china came out, as fine as it could be. That is when my grandma made her best dinners. And so that's when family and friends would come over to laugh and cry and laugh some more. And my grandma would always make sure that you were well fed. And even when you left, that you had a plate to go home to, because just in case you got hungry again, she wanted to make sure that you had something to eat. And that's the nature of who they were. But I find when I told that story to so many people, they said, you know what, that sounds just like my mom, or that sounds just like my grandma. And so I wanted to share that, because that's a part of what South Carolina is all about. It's that fellowship that you get through food and being together and telling stories. And as you can see with my campaign, that is part of the heartbeat of our campaign, of doing just that. I want folks to know not only Jaime Harrison, the guy who's running for Senate, but Jaime Harrison, the man. And what are the values that underpin me? What are the things that drive me and make me who I am? And that was one of my favorite ads that we've run, and we've run a lot, but that was one of my favorite ones because it had heartbeat, and it was all about who I was and how I grew up here in South Carolina.
Let's move on to healthcare, which has been a top of mind issue, obviously, with the coronavirus pandemic, and was even before this. You said something I've heard a lot of Democratic candidates say in South Carolina and around the country, which is you want to build on, expand upon, fix the problems with the Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare. You've said you do not support Medicare for All, a single-payer system. We haven't get a lot of specifics about what exactly the problems with the Affordable Care Act are. When you say build upon it, expand upon it, fix it, what does that actually mean?
Well, there were some holes in the Affordable Care Act. With all of this legislation, it's all about compromise in order to get enough votes, in order to get it on the president's desk and then get it through. As you can recall, there were some really compromises that were made in the Senate in order to get it done. You had Collins at that time, I think Joe Lieberman, and some other senator, I can't remember. But they made the modifications and changes to get it done. But what it did was it left some holes in the system. One of the holes was in mental health coverage. There's some gaping holes. We don't really sufficiently fund mental health and push insurance companies to fund mental health at the levels that it needs to be covered. Also, dental and vision, which are also crucial parts of our health care, but aren't sufficiently covered in the Affordable Care Act. They're sort of ancillary and not really a whole part of it. And one of the things that I see, particularly in low-income and working-income communities, it's that dental and vision that are sometimes left out, and those are lingering issues and problems that linger with those communities and the people in those communities for generations. And I want to strengthen those. I also want to, we know when the case went to the Supreme Court, they gutted it, and therefore they took away the mandate for Medicaid expansion. I want to figure out how we get the 12 remaining states that have not accepted Medicaid to incentivize to do just that. And so there are a lot of tweaks that we need. We need more money and resources for our community health centers. We need to figure out how we shore up to keep rural hospitals from closing, because that's a big issue that we see as a result of the lack of Medicaid expansion. So those are some of the issues that I really want to shore up in the ACA right now.
I did actually want to ask you about the Medicaid expansion,
Yeah.
because I've heard you talk about this a lot, but of course, under the current system, maybe you're talking about changing the system, but under the current system, it's up to governors. Why not run for governor instead of running for Senate if that's such a big priority for you?
Well, in order for governors to get the money, they have to get it from the federal government, right? And so we'll work on the governorship in 2022. Don't worry about that. But my focus right now is working on making sure South Carolina can get the money. Now, Doug Jones has a bill called the SAME Act, and this basically restarts the clock. As you remember, when the ACA was passed, it gave states, I think, 4 or 5 years that the federal government would pay 100% of the cost of Medicaid expansion, 100% of it. And then after that period, the states would pick up 10% and the federal government would maintain their 90%. Well, this restarts the clock for those 12 states that are left now that have not accepted Medicaid expansion. So meaning that for another 5 years or 4 years, they get 100% coverage of Medicaid in their states. And I hope, Barack Obama has been gone out of the presidency long enough for the folks to understand that this is in the best interest of the people of South Carolina. It helps the people because it provides health care, it helps our economy, and it helps keep our rural hospitals from closing. It is a win-win-win, and I just don't understand. It makes me scratch my head, while South Carolina has to be one of 12 states instead of being one of the 38 states that have expanded this.
South Carolina AARP has been a longtime sponsor for Pints and Politics, and this is a question that we asked a lot of folks. Americans pay the highest prescription drug cost prices in the world. What can you do or would do if elected to lower those costs?
Well, the first thing that we need to do is give the Department of Homeland Health and Human Services the ability to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies' drug prices. You know, if you look at, you wonder, for the same medicine, you can go over to Germany, same medicine, and they pay, you know, half the cost of what we're paying here as American citizens. And why is that? That is because their country negotiate prices with the pharmaceutical companies. And in the end, it is American people who are paying, covering the money that is lost from those pharmaceutical companies over negotiating with Germany. We're paying for the pharmaceuticals over in Germany and in some of these other countries. Well, why can't we do that here? Why can't we have our government also negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies in order to bring down the cost of drugs? I think we need to give that authority to our government, to the administrator, the secretary at HHS, or the Medicare or Medicaid administrator, to do just that. And that's just a no-brainer to me. We got to figure out how we reduce the cost. You know, my grandma, who is, you know, part of my heart, often tells me, she lives in not a nursing home, but in a senior community down in Orangeburg now. And she told me, she said, you know, I know some folks who, instead of taking their blood pressure medicine twice a day or 3 times a day, as their doctor told them, they only take it once a day, because that's all they can afford. Because otherwise they can't afford to, if they take it all as prescribed, they can't afford to get new medicine in a timely fashion. And so either they have to cut it in half, or they only take one a day. We don't need that in this country. We can do better, and we will do better. But we got to have the right type of leadership that actually cares about this in order to do better.
Before we move on, I do just want to ask you, I mentioned the coronavirus pandemic. Yesterday, President Trump tweeted that he was calling off negotiations for new stimulus relief over this pandemic with Speaker Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, you know, basically saying that they were refusing to budge, refusing to come down on their price tag. You know, Republicans in the Senate and in the House have complained that the amount of money that Democrats are looking to spend would bankrupt the country, and specifically have complained about the amount of funding that would go to state and local governments. The president has said that he thinks it would be bailing out Democratic states and Democratic-led cities. You know, what position do you take on these negotiations, and should there have been a middle ground that the leaders should have found here?
Well, I would have hoped there would have been a middle ground. You know, the House of Representatives passed their bill in May. It is October. May, the House passed their bill. Then they just recently passed a trimmed down bill, I think a week or so ago. In August, the Senate took off. Lindsey Graham even got a tan in August. But the urgency right now is, oh, we got to get the Supreme Court justice through. The urgency is 3,500 people in South Carolina have died because of the coronavirus. Over 150,000 people in South Carolina have contracted this virus. A number of businesses have shuttered and closed. Right now, you look at this business where they probably would have been booming during lunchtime, they're empty right now, right? That is the status of where we are. What is the urgency on the minds of the people in South Carolina and across the country? It's their livelihoods, it's their health. And why doesn't the Senate feel that same type of urgency to address the coronavirus and the issues that people are dealing with, but they feel this urgency to ram through the Supreme Court justice? It's all about politics. We got to put the people first. We have to put the people first. And this whole argument about bailing out states and localities, let me tell you how political this is and how it makes no sense. And they need to sit back and understand the civics, get a civics lesson, right? And Lindsey Graham is a part of this. How do we fund our police forces? States and local governments. And when you don't give states and local governments the resources right now because they desperately need it, then that means you're not going to fund what? Police forces. I mean, it is a simple no-brainer, folks. Get out of this red and blue thing and look at the impact that it's having on the lives of people, real people. And they are all about politics, but I'm about focusing on what the people are concerned about right now. But you would never hear that from Lindsey Graham, right? Oh, it was like, well, those blue states on the debate stage, those blue states. Seriously, come on.
You mentioned that this slim down bill that the House passed recently.
Yeah.
I did just want to say, so even Joe Cunningham voted against that last week, the Democrat down in Charleston, and he did so because he said it was a messaging exercise that was basically designed to put Republicans in a corner, was not a real solution to this problem. Is there any blame to go towards Democratic leadership of the way they've handled these negotiations?
Well, this is what we just heard from from Chairman Powell the other day, which is if the House and the Senate, and that means Democrats and Republicans, do not act, they are going to send this economy into a tailspin. And so the remarks that we're going to shut off negotiations in order to do it was not responsible. We don't need folks. I know I talk about my son all the time, but sometimes looking at our political leaders, it reminds you of 6-year-olds on a playground. I'm going to take my ball and go away because you're not playing right. Come on, folks. People are dying. Their businesses are shutting down for good that they've been investing in for a lifetime. I mean, I'm hearing Solstice Kitchen, which is here, a place that one of the first places when my wife and I moved back here, we went out to Northeast to Solstice Kitchen and had a great dinner. And we love going there. And we go there for birthdays and anniversaries. And I got the email the other day that they said they were closing down for good. And it broke my heart. And we're hearing those type of stories over and over and over in South Carolina. But again, you don't hear our senators talking about the urgency of doing something now, of making sure that, you sit down at a table, get into a room, close the door. I know what it's like to get 218 bills to pass on the floor of the House. I know what it's like to get something done in the U.S. Senate and sending it to the White House. Well, people have to have the urgency to actually get it done. And since they don't seem to have it now, hopefully the voters on November 3rd will create that urgency for some of these people.
You did mention the Supreme Court, and it is a topic at the top of the news right now, and it is something a lot of South Carolina voters do care about. You have criticized Senator Graham for the fact that in 2016 and again in 2018, he said that if a nominee comes up in the last year of President Trump's term, they would wait until after the election, they would not vote to confirm it until after the election. They'd let the American people decide. I do want to give you he said hold the tape. We're going to hold the tape on this.
We're going to hold the tape and we're going to play it.
So if you win, if Joe Biden wins,
yep,
and if the Democrats have the majority in the U.S. Senate in 2024 and a vacancy opens up on the Supreme Court, would you vote to confirm Joe Biden's nominee?
Well, that's a good question. But right now the precedent is we're establishing a new precedent that you can do it, right? Because the Republicans and Lindsey Graham established a new precedent in 2016 when they didn't even give Merrick Garland. Not even did they not give him a hearing, but many of them didn't even meet with the guy. And you can't tell me, and many of them had voted for him to be on the Court of Appeals in Washington, D.C. So they set a new standard for how the Senate would take up these appointments. Now they are setting a new standard for how we take up these appointments. I'm about the rules and the standards that we have set. So if this is good for you, then it's going to be good for me, right? Because that is the standard. And all I'm saying is, folks, just stick to your word. Be true to who you are. So if you're saying that this is, you can't then say, and whenever it happens, well, you're not supposed to do that because the majority, I don't know if they can come up with another excuse for why you can or can't do it. I mean, the American people want us just to say, if we're going to be a nation of laws and rules and processes, then let's be a nation of laws and rules and processes. And let's not change it depending on who is in charge or not. And that's where I have a problem with it. That's why, when people are talking about changing the filibuster right now, I am extremely hesitant for doing that. Because we have some standards that are established. And I know some in my party see the short-term political gain, but I look at not just what happens and what is politically beneficial now, but what is the long-term ramifications for making those type of changes, and who does it impact? And I think you have to take that type of, you have to look at the world through those type of lens before you just make these knee-jerk reactions. And that's why I'm disappointed in Lindsey Graham, because he said, use my own words. Here, I am setting the standard, even when Donald Trump is president. And now he's gone back on it.
So it sounds like if they do go ahead and confirm her, that you would consider that a new precedent the Democrats
That's
can
a new
follow in the
precedent.
future. Yeah.
It's a new
if they
precedent.
don't, will you not? Would you say, okay,
Yes.
we'll hold on?
Yes.
So, and just one last thing on this. You know, you've said you don't think this nomination should be rushed before the election, but you've not yet said whether or not you would vote to confirm her. Obviously, her hearings are coming up on Monday. You'll get a chance to review her record in more depth. Will you tell the voters of South Carolina before this election, on the merits alone, on the qualifications alone, whether you would vote to confirm Amy Coney Barrett?
Well, we'll see. I mean, one of the things is I would love to have an opportunity to ask her some questions. I mean, some of the things that I'm really concerned about as it relates to the Supreme Court is, are you going to roll back the civil rights of folks? You know, when Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence said that all men, I say all people, are created equally, that is the standard by which we as a nation have to live up to that. And we have made a lot of gains over the course of the history of this great nation to make sure that we get closer to that standard, that all people are created equal. So where do you stand in terms of Brown versus Board of Education? Or do you feel like we need to roll that back? Where do you stand as it relates to marriage equality? Or do you feel like we need to roll back on that? Those things are very important for me to understand, because again, we need to move closer to that standard of all people being created equal and being treated equally in this country. And if you, the way that you interpret the law is to roll back on those civil rights gained by folks, then I can't be supportive of that. And so that's my standard. That's my bright line for whether or not because again, it's moving closer to what America should be, and not moving away and going back. We don't need to go back. Our better days as a nation are in front of us and not behind us.
In that vein, the High Court is an issue of October.
Yeah.
Some Democrats have floated the idea of expanding the number of Supreme Court justices from the current 9. Are you saying that should be looked at? Do you believe 9 is fine, don't mess with it? Or are you open to it at all? And if so, what number do you think would be more representative?
Listen, I've always thought of the Supreme Court as 9. I have never thought of it more than 9. So that's where I am at this point in time. You know, there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts, but I just want to go back to the precedent and the word that our senator said. I mean, he promised, not to me, but to all of us as constituents of South Carolina, that he would not take up a nominee. He would not personally, he would not cast a vote for that person. Not only is he casting a vote, he is leading the hearings in order to put this vote on the floor of the U.S. Senate. And in my, that ain't no exaggeration. That is no extrapolation. That is a bold-faced, underlined, circle it, put it in a box, lie, L-I-E, something I teach my son that you can't do. And so, and the worst thing you can do as somebody, as a political leader, the worst thing you can do, the greatest line that you can cross is to lie to the people that you represent. Just be a man about it. Stand up and say, I changed my mind. But he can't even do that.
But back on my question, though, you said you're not thinking of going past 9 at this time. Is that something that you think could possibly?
Again, it's the same way I feel with a filibuster. There are ramifications for what you do when you open up Pandora's box. And so, I don't want to change filibuster. I don't believe it. We should change the Supreme Court at this point in time. And so I don't want to open that Pandora's box. Now, let me say, if folks are starting to say, well, Plessy versus Ferguson needs to be established law again. Well, let me tell you, as a black man who grew up in the South, I ain't going to let that happen, right? So let's be clear about that. I don't look good in chains, so I'm not going back to that. And not that I think we would ever go back to that. I'm being a little foolish here in terms of saying this. But all I'm saying is, for me, the way that I look at it, I'm that guy who gets goosebumps when I see the Capitol lit up at night. It is because I know the magic of that place. I know the power it has to transform lives and to transform, what goes on in this world. And so, our system was created in this way for a reason. And unless there's some compelling reason in order to change it, and it has to be extremely compelling, where our democracy is on the line, I don't foresee me supporting any effort like that.
Well, while we're on the topic of these kind of big structural reforms, these norms of American politics, let me ask about two more real quick, because both of these Senator Graham actually brought up on the debate stage, suggesting that if you win, if Democrats win the Senate majority, these are what are going to happen. One is abolishing the Electoral College, and the other is D.C. statehood.
Yes.
I'm curious about your thoughts on both of those.
Well, in terms of the Electoral College, listen, I think I've been open on this. You know, we have a problem when people feel as though their vote does not matter. And right now, the way that our system is set up, there are a lot of folks who feel that way. That, you know, it doesn't matter who they vote for president in South Carolina because it doesn't count. And so therefore, they don't feel compelled to go out and exercise their right. I think that is the death of democracy, when people feel as though if they cast their ballot, it has no impact on where we go as a country. And I think that's something that we need to reevaluate. Now, I know there are a lot of states that are taking this on their own, and in the legislative process are coming up with commissions that allow whoever wins the popular vote to then receive the vote, folks. Because when I think of any other contest other than golf, winning the most votes means you won. Then why would it be differently in terms of deciding the most powerful person in the most powerful country on the face of this planet? It would make sense to me. And I think anybody you would talk in the street said, well, if you had one person who got 2 million votes and another person that got 2.5 million votes, who should be the president? I think most people would say the person that got 2.5 million votes, because more Americans voted for that person in order to do so. So to have a system that does not allow that just doesn't quite square up to me.
I mean, D.C. statehood? D.C. statehood?
Well, I also believe that everybody should have representation. If you are a taxpayer and you're an American citizen, then you should have representation in Washington, D.C.
Even if that, you know, I mean, so obviously the reason why Senator Graham brings it up is because D.C. is a 95% Democratic city right now.
Well, yeah.
It'll be 2 more Democratic senators.
Well, and Puerto Rico has a Republican governor. I mean, so work harder. Do your politics in that state. And because, I mean, come on, it's all about politics. I'm about making sure that we represent the interests of the people of D.C. Again, Lindsey Graham is all about playing political games. He wasn't always like that, but he is now. And it's all about political games. In the end of the day, this is about representing the people in this nation and making sure that everyone feels as though, again, I'm going back to my gold standard, that all people are created equal. If all people are created equal, that means, and if I'm an American citizen and I live in a state or I live in an area, I should have representation in Washington, D.C. If you are taking, Uncle Sam, if you are taking my hard-earned dollars, right, my tax dollars to go to fund all this other stuff, then shouldn't I have somebody to have a say to say how my dollars are spent? Again, this is all common sense stuff. I mean, if you ask Joe Blow on the street, and they would say, that makes sense to me. But again, it's for folks who want to play politics. And this is the thing that I will tell the folks in South Carolina. I said it on the debate stage. I'll say it tonight. I'll say it on the debate stage again when we get on the debate stage. That you may not always agree with where I am, but you will always know where I stand. I'm not going to flip and flop. I'm not going to hem and holler about certain things. I'm going to be straightforward and honest with you, because I believe that is what you deserve as a citizen in the state of South Carolina, to have a representative that will shoot straight with you about being honest and being where they are. And that's just who I am.
Well, you've seen your work history. You've seen it from the House. You've seen it from the political party. If you had to pick 3 pretty easy changes that need to be done in politics, what would they be? I mean, would you? How about committee heads have term limits?
Yeah.
Term limits in general, or even reducing the amount of money in politics. Is there a way that can be done?
That was going to be 2 things that come to mind for me. One, political gerrymandering. I do not believe that politicians should choose their voters. I believe voters should choose the people who represent them. And I really do believe that one of the death nails of our democracy right now, it's sort of a cancer that is eating us away, is gerrymandering. And we really have to figure out how we tackle that beast. The second head of that monster is the money in politics. And listen, I'm not saying for folks, you know, this election, we can't change it yet. So please go to jamieharrison.com and send me your contributions and your support. See Senator Graham, you can do it without crying. But nonetheless, what's important to me is that we should never again have another contest where you got folks. I mean, this is going to be the most expensive contest in the history of South Carolina. And when I think about what some of these resources and money could do to some of the communities that I've visited over the course of the past 2 years, it is mind-blowing. I mean, I went to one of the HBCUs that told me that their annual budget is $10 million a year. Think about that. In the end of the day, Senator Graham and I may raise, you know, I don't know, 120 or whatever $million in this race. Think about what that money could do in order to improve the lives of folks in some of our most impoverished and rural communities. I think it much better than, not that I don't like seeing myself on TV 50 million times a day or on YouTube, but I think there's a much better use for how we improve the society and the communities that our folks live in.
We talked a lot about Senator Graham. South Carolina's other senator, Tim Scott, put forward a bill this summer in response to the death of George Floyd and the protests that erupted around police brutality to try to put forward some reforms. There was another bill in the House that went further. Senator Scott positioned his bill as sort of a compromise between Republicans, some of whom didn't want to do very much, and Democrats who wanted to do an awful lot. And yet Senate Democrats said it wasn't enough, that there wasn't enough change in that bill to move forward with it. As a result, here we are a few months later, and absolutely nothing has happened. Would you have voted for Senator Scott's bill?
Well, this is the thing about compromise. Compromise means that you get one person from the other, at least one person from the other side, and one person from your side to sit together in a room and create the bill that is the compromise bill. You can't come up with a bill for me and say, this is a compromise bill that you should vote for. That's not the art of compromise. Now, if Senator Graham really wanted to address this issue, he is the most powerful person in the United States Senate on issues dealing with judiciary. Most powerful person, because he's the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. If this bill was so important, which it is, why didn't he take this bill up and mark it up in committee? Why didn't he allow the process to take place where Democratic senators on Judiciary Committee and Republican senators on Judiciary Committee could offer their amendments in order to make the bill better, to offer their amendments in order to bring it up, to make it be the best product, compromise product that they could then bring to the United States, to the floor of the U.S. Senate. Because this issue is so important enough, that is the type of process you would normally take on this. But he didn't do that. He said, okay, Tim Scott has a bill, and I'm going to let Tim bring the bill, and it's going to go straight to the floor. That's not the case. And so there are things in Tim's bill that are fine, right? But there are things that, for me, that don't go far enough.
I wanted to ask you what
qualified immunity, I think, is one of them. No person in this country, I don't care if you're president of the United States or you're the janitor at a school, should be able to tread on the constitutional rights of another person, ever, and be immune from any type of ramifications. And again, that's just how I look at the world. Our constitutional rights are sacred, right? And there should be nobody that should be able to tread upon those. And so I think that should be. I think, we have to look at chokeholds and having a national force standard. I also think we need a registry to root out the bad apples so that somebody who commits atrocities in Chicago can't come down to South Carolina to, Bamberg County and become, a sheriff deputy, right? And nobody in the community ever know about it. I think there needs to be more transparency and accountability in there. And then this effort, right now that is going on to demonize folks and saying that they're for defunding the police is crazy. I want you all to know this right now, and ask Senator Graham this the next time. Does he support the president's budget, the last administration budget? If he does, there's a $500 million cut in community policing that is in that budget. So, but all of a sudden now it is, defunding the police. Well, who's $500 million? That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money that it could go to communities here in South Carolina in order to fund our policing and to make sure that our policing in our communities is as strong as possible. You know, I come from a family where law enforcement folks are in my family. My grandpa, Ron, on my stepfather's dad, was in the police force for 30 some odd years. We know what it's like to send somebody off in the morning and not know whether or not they're going to come home at night. And so it's a slap in the face to me and my family for him to say, I don't respect policing. Well, Senator Graham, I don't know if he has any police in his family, but I do. My grandpa and some cousins. And so again, it's a slap in the face because it's all about politics for Lindsey Graham and it's not about actually addressing the issue. It's all about scaring people for Lindsey Graham instead of inspiring people to vote for him. He's been in the Senate and the House for 25 years. Why can't you run on your record? How many ads does he have even talking about his record? If I were in his place, I would think that's the thing number one reason why I should be reelected. But no, he's trying to scare people about me, but it's not going to work. It's not working now.
We got a lot of reader questions, several focused on the environment and particularly the low country, which is most susceptible in the state to climate change, sea level rise. What step can you take as a senator to address that, especially along the coast, but even in internal parts of the state where climate change is real as well?
Yeah, climate change is real, and it can't just be words. It has to be actions. You know, what we've gotten from the senator from the past few years is a bunch of press conferences and press releases and very little action in terms of actually addressing. You know, we should not have pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. And we got to figure out how we get back in there and be a world leader in terms of dramatically reducing carbon emissions, because that is part of the reason why the climate is warming up, because the polar caps are melting and therefore the sea level is rising as a result of it. That is just the science. It is not me extrapolating. That is the science that we are seeing that happen. And our coastal cities are seeing it. We're seeing larger storms that are popping up. They're popping up, they're bigger, and they're coming at a more frequent pace. The window for hurricanes is a much larger and more robust window for hurricanes right now. So we need to address that. We also need to make sure that we are trying to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, and that means investing in technology for alternative energy sources. Solar is a big thing, which could be a boon for rural communities here in South Carolina. We got a lot of sun. As we know, we don't lack in sunlight. And so that could be a boon economically for rural communities. I've sat down with some folks from the solar industry who have been hit hard because of the coronavirus. But that also means that we cannot drill off of the coast of South Carolina. Now, Lindsey Graham, the author of the South Carolina Offshore Drilling Act, is now saying that, oh, I'm not for offshore drilling. Well, you wrote a bill that's called the South Carolina Offshore Drilling Act to allow the drilling off the coast of South Carolina. Now you're trying to lay claim that you were the impetus behind the president establishing a moratorium. Well, the moratorium is just that. It is a piece of paper that can be torn apart, and an executive order can be written tomorrow to say, oh, I changed my mind. We're going to drill off the coast of South Carolina because the election's over, right? No. We need something that is permanent, that the people in South Carolina know that we will never have drilling, not only off of our coast, but off of the eastern seaboard. Because, my friends, there aren't walls between us and North Carolina in the Atlantic Ocean. So if you drill off of North Carolina and there's an oil spill, then the currents are going to drag that right down to Myrtle Beach and Charleston. It would devastate our environment. It would devastate our economy. And we can't allow that to happen. And so, you know, I hope people take Lindsey Graham to task on his flip-flops on that. And we got to stop seismic testing. One thing that Lindsey can do right now, if he's really, really honest about this, if he really, really wants to make sure that there is no drilling off the coast of South Carolina, he sits on the Appropriations Committee. Pass an amendment to the Appropriations Committee that not one brown penny for federal dollars will be allowed for seismic testing or drilling off the coast of South Carolina. If he wants to make it permanent, then he can make it permanent. If he doesn't do it, I'll do it when I'm in the U.S. Senate.
What changes to the National Flood Insurance Program and FEMA mapping would you do to support and help your constituents? I know there was some talk a while ago. They suggested raising flood insurance prices to what they should be to cover damages and losses. As soon as that was floated, the numbers were so astronomical, they got rid of it. They just pushed it down the road. So are we facing a crisis there?
Well,
and is this the fault of people who live on the coast? Should they be responsible with higher premiums?
Well, no, yeah, I don't think it's the fault of the folks that live on the coast, because they're not creating the issue of climate change and the sea level rise. I mean, I think there's some responsibility that the government bears in that, because one, people only build where we as a government allow them to build, right? We set the standards for how off of the coast and where you can build and what the lands are. And so people are only doing what is allowed to be done. And so I don't think that the individuals bear all of the fault and the responsibility for that. I think our government bears some of that responsibility. And so we need to help and figure out ways that we can alleviate some of that pressure. That's not to say that the rates don't increase somewhat, but you're right. It will be astronomical for homeowners off of the coast if those insurance rates really get to the level where they should be, given the state of where we are and how hurricanes are popping up at such a frequent rate. But I think that the government is going to have to bear that cost.
Let me ask you about your personal background a little bit.
Yeah.
So you were a lobbyist for 8 years. There have been a lot of ads about this, both attacking you, and recently,
Yep.
I think you've gone on defense. You've noted that several of your clients were some of South Carolina's biggest companies. You know, both of our last two presidents from both parties, President Obama and President Trump, kind of ran their campaigns against lobbyists, right? President Trump ran against the swamp. President Obama said the revolving door is a big problem in Washington, of folks going from working on Capitol Hill to working for private companies and helping them on Capitol Hill. You know, do you think that that corporations should have as much influence as they do on Capitol Hill, or do you think that lobbying, the work of lobbying, the profession of lobbying, has been unfairly maligned?
Well, you know, it's just like, you know, I remember teaching a class and folks were saying, well, what does a lobbyist do? And trying to get an understanding of that. And the best thing is, and I put my teacher hat on, the best thing is to give the analogy to the courts, right? Because in many, you know, our government is a third arm of our government. In the courts, you can represent yourself because that is part of your constitutional right. Or you can hire somebody to represent you. Someone who's been trained to understand the courts, to make the right type of arguments, to know the relationships with the judges, to represent you. But the choice is yours. And, you know, those folks in our society who have more money can hire the best lawyers. For those who don't, there are public defenders that can hire them, or they can take the case on their own. In many ways, when I look at the lobbying world, it's similar. It is, you know, whereas the analogy, the courtroom is Capitol Hill. And the question is, do you go to Capitol Hill to represent yourself? And many people do, and they do it effectively. Or do you hire somebody who understands the Hill and how the Hill operates, when the bills come up for consideration, the measures that can be done, in order to explain that and to inform your strategy on how you proceed? And so I sort of see it in the same way. I think it's been political convenience for the demonization to take place because, and it hasn't been quite, and it's the same thing with Lindsey Graham. You know, right now the lobbying is a bad thing. But if lobbying is dirty, then don't look under Lindsey Graham's fingernails right now. I mean, 23 of his former staffers have been lobbyists. He's taken over $2 million from lobbyists. Even my firm that he likes to condemn, you wrote an article about it, how he had a fundraiser where he raised almost $20,000 from the firm. And again, this is the hypocrisy that people don't like about politics. And I'm gonna always shoot straight with folks. And anytime anybody asks me about what I've done, I've been an open book. I've been very transparent. I'm happy to have served and worked for Boeing and Michelin and the University of South Carolina and the South Carolina Ports Authority.
Do you want to address the client that he's brought up in all these ads? Because so basically, I know you mentioned on the debate stage, it was years before they were your client, but that's kind of his point, is saying, why did you pick them up as a client if they had done all that shady stuff in Hurricane Katrina?
Well, look, and my point back to Senator Graham was this. You voted for Secretary Mnuchin to be the Treasury Secretary. This secretary foreclosed on 17,000 homes between 2009 and 2014. His name was the king of foreclosures. Again, Lindsey Graham, his hands aren't clean in this thing. And he's taken money from a lot of banks and businesses that have foreclosed on folks. So just be honest with the people, and that's the real thing. But in the end of the day, this is what it goes back to. Lindsey Graham's job was to represent people in South Carolina. My job was to work for my clients who employed people in South Carolina. And that's what I did. You know, the dredging of the Port of Charleston, I was able to work on making sure that was part of the authorization in President Obama's budget in order to get that done. When Senator Graham couldn't get it done, I worked with Joe Biden and the Obama administration to help facilitate that. And so I'm proud of the work that I've been able to do, but Senator Graham was just not being honest. I mean, I was even on the Hill on the whole Hurricane Katrina stuff. I was on the Hill when Katrina hit. I helped to lead the bill, to get the votes for the bill in order to help with the recovery for that region when Senator Graham didn't do that. And so, again, it's just being disingenuous and dishonest. And it's sad that that's what you have to result to when you are a senator that's been in Washington, D.C. for 25 years.
I understand that you have displayed some words that you see as inspiration, but they're a little bit shocking if you take them the wrong way. And it's a quote from our racist former governor, Ben Tillman. And it reads, "We have done our level best. We have scratched our heads to find out how we could eliminate the last one of them. We stuffed ballot boxes. We shot them. We are not ashamed." How old were you when you picked that up? And can you explain why that became an inspiration for you?
Well, you know, our history here in South Carolina is not always pleasant. Some of the leaders that we've had here in South Carolina have not always done things that have been good. And Ben Tillman is one of them. This is a man who was a United States Senator. He was governor of South Carolina. He actually changed the Constitution in South Carolina because he was so fearful that an African American would ever be elected governor. And he made our governorship one of the weakest in the country as a result of it. This was also the same man who, as a United States Senator, would go to the floor of the U.S. Senate and with glee talk joyfully about the lynching of black folks. You know, I love this country and I love my state. You know, the home is where the heart is. And I understand that our history in this state has not been pleasant, particularly for my community and my people. But that doesn't mean that we're not a good people. That does not mean that we're not a good state. We are. And what I have seen in South Carolina is an evolution. Again, moving closer to Thomas Jefferson's ideal of all people being created equally. And so what I use as an inspiration is that this seat that I am vying for was the seat of John C. Calhoun. This was the seat of Ben Tillman. This was also the seat of Strom Thurmond. Now think about this. South Carolina, the very first state to secede from the Union because of the issue of slavery. To become the very first state in this great union that we have, that it has two African-American senators serving at the same time. It is an evolution. It is a moving closer to that ideal that Thomas Jefferson talked about. And I use that as an inspiration that things change, places change, people change, because that was once acceptable. Now it is not. And I want to make sure that as we move forward, we move farther away from that than where we are.
You know, so that actually is perfectly into the next question I was going to ask you. You know, when I was covering the Democratic primary, the presidential primary in South Carolina, you know, I traveled all over the state back when it was okay to do this, talked to hundreds of voters, black and white voters. And, you know, one of the things that would come up was, you know, we had a few major African-American candidates in the field. And we'd ask some voters, you know, does that matter to you? And we got pretty mixed responses. You know, there were a lot of black voters who said no, like it is not something that crosses my mind. I focus only on policy and who can beat President Trump. That was a huge factor for a lot of people. There were others who said yes, like, you know, I care about identity. I care about someone who can relate to me and I want someone there. You know, do you think that voters, perhaps especially black voters who make up, you know, 30% of the electorate in South Carolina, should take your race into consideration when they go to the polls, or whether they decide even if they are going to go to the polls?
You know, what I hope they take in consideration, you know, am I African American? Yes. But that doesn't mean that every African American is advocating things that would be beneficial to the African American community. One, the community is not a monolith, right? There are very different people who have different lifestyles and doing different things. But I hope what all voters, not just the black voters, but all voters would take account is the experiences that I'm bringing into this, the way that I look at the world, the understanding that that we need to make sure that we are fighting for all, to make sure that the American dream that I've lived, that I've been able to enjoy, is something that every kid in the state can enjoy as well, that they can live their American dream. And I'm talking about the issues in a way, and I'm talking about the issues that are actually important to the people. I mean, you think about this. We're in the midst of a pandemic. In the midst of a pandemic, and 38% of rural communities in South Carolina don't have broadband. This is not a new issue, folks. This has been the way that it has been in South Carolina for a long time. Senator Graham has been in the Senate for 18 years. And why is it just now, just this year, he's proud to say, I'm offered a bill to expand broadband in rural communities in South Carolina? Well, duh. We haven't had broadband in this state for a long time. How in the world do we expect our kids to compete with the rest of the world when they can't even connect with the rest of the world? When our superintendent of education announced that there were 17,000 kids in July that had not been in touch with their school system since March, I fell back in my chair. 17,000 kids, because I would have been one of those kids. Because my community probably would not have had broadband, or my parents would not have had the resources in order to pay for the internet to have broadband. So what happens to those kids? Do they just fall through the crack and we as a society are okay with that? That is why we need a senator that understands the urgency of the issues right now. That is an urgent issue that our senator should be working on, but he's not. The issue that you can go to my hometown of Orangeburg, and out in the parking lot, there is a tent, a series of tents, because they can't accommodate the folks with the coronavirus inside the hospital. That is an urgent issue. Or if you go to Bamberg or Barnwell, where their hospital closed, and now we have a coronavirus, or people are getting impacted, African Americans disproportionately getting impacted. You know, I want you guys to do this. Go to these communities where the hospitals closed. Ask them if they've seen Lindsey Graham. Ask them if Lindsey Graham has come since their hospital closed or was there to help them prevent it from being closed. And the answer you will get is a no, because he cares more about what's going on in Washington, D.C. than what's going on in Barnwell or in Hampton or in Saluda. That's why we need somebody who's focused like a laser on the issues people are dealing with in this state.
This may have to be our last question because we're running up against time, but I'm looking for, we're going to do this. We'll ask this one question and then we're going to have a little pause and then we'll go into our speed round. But looking for some intel here. This is just you and I talking and nobody else is listening.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
How many people were you able to register as new voters? You talked about that earlier, about it was going to be a big effort. Just you and I just talking right now. How many people did you add to the voting scrolls?
There are a lot of new people that are voting this year. And that's a good thing. I mean, in a democracy, we should try to make sure that as many people as possible get registered and can vote. I don't understand this whole thing about trying to restrict people from voting and exercising their right. So there are a lot of new people that were added to the rolls, and that's a good thing.
50,000?
We'll see. We got to ask Chris Whitmire over the Election Commission. He'll give us a number.
Can I just ask you one last question before we go to the lightning round? You mentioned we got a lot of racist leaders in South Carolina history. You mentioned Ben Tillman, from segregationists to white supremacists. A few days ago, you tweeted a story that had a photo of Senator Graham. A guy took a selfie with him. Turned out he was a leader of the Proud Boys, which has been identified as a white nationalist group. Senator Graham's campaign has made clear he had no idea who that guy was. He came up to him, took a selfie with him. That could happen to you once we go through this pandemic. You've also, you made hay out of the fact that he darkened your skin in a digital ad. Again, his campaign said there was no sort of racist overtones of that. They were darkening the whole image there. But, what you've done with this is sort of imply that Lindsey Graham is racist. I want to ask you if you think that is...
Well, this is my problem with Senator Graham. Senator Graham's 65 years old. He grew up here in South Carolina. He is seeing some of the darkest times here in South Carolina as it relates to race relations. The last lynching that took place in his home county, right? So he should not be, he's not a neophyte as it relates to race relations and the sensitivity of the issue in the state. But he doesn't talk like he understands those sensitivities. He doesn't act like he understands those sensitivities. And so the darkening of my skin, no, that the whole ad was not darkened. I was darkened because the woman and was bright lights were all shined on her. It wasn't me. You could compare the picture, the original picture, to the other picture. We all know the tropes that have been done in the past, that the darker the skin, that means the more menacing a person is. That means the more nefarious that they are. I mean, the studies have been done over and over again. Do I really care? No. Because in the end of the day, I'm going to talk to the people of South Carolina. But the senator has to be understand the power of his words. I mean, he talked about, he actually campaigned with a woman who said that she wanted to be on the front row of a lynching. What's the senator in Mississippi? Cindy Hyde-Smith. So she said that, and then after she said that, instead of condemning that, he actually goes and campaigns with her. 30% of your constituents are African American. Most of them can trace their families back into slavery. They know and understand the power of lynching. My grandma tells stories of the KKK marching through her street, and she tells it with tears. And you're the senator not for just white folks, you're the senator for everybody in South Carolina. So represent everybody. Understand the sensitivity of these issues for everybody. And that's my problem with Senator Graham. That he doesn't understand it. Just when he gets on the stage and talks about, well, the liberals are all nuts. Well, you know what? Probably 40% of your state is liberal. So you're telling your constituents nuts also? It's the language that we use in order to address people. We need a senator that is going to bring us together, not tear us apart. And right now we have a senator. And that's why my respect for Senator Graham has diminished. Because it used to be that Senator Graham was somebody that I thought would take us to our higher place. That when John McCain was alive, they could to rise above the political fray. I don't know who this Senator Graham is. I don't know this man who would darken somebody in the skin. I don't know this man who would campaign with somebody who said that they want to be on the front row of a lynching. And we deserve better here in South Carolina. We all have the warts and the sores from our racial history in the state. I know it firsthand. But we need someone who can take us past that to a better place. And I hope that that's what I can do as the next United States Senator from South Carolina.
All right. Let me just in that section there, we want to do several housekeeping things. Thank you, first of all, to River Rat Brewing for hosting us. We really enjoyed it. Great host. Everything worked out great for us. Please go to the Post and Courier website, sign up for all our newsletters, Pints and Politics, Columbia, Palmetto Politics, and also stay tuned because tomorrow at 5 o'clock back in Charleston, we're going to do our last one for the election season with Joe Cunningham. So that'll be 5 o'clock. Go on and register for that as well. So right now we're going to close things up, and we do this every time with a speed round, lightning round, quick fire questions.
Sounds good.
Quick answers.
I promise not to filibuster.
What is the last book you read or are reading now?
Ooh, I am reading a book by Jack Bass on the history of South Carolina.
Title?
I can't remember the title of it.
We're here in a pub. Are you a beer drinker, and do you have a favorite flavor, type, anything?
I don't drink beer that much, so I don't think I mean, normally if I do drink beer, it's usually a Corona.
They've been maligned during this.
I know.
Who was a better president from the South, Jimmy Carter or Bill Clinton?
Woo! That's an interesting question. I would say, in terms of, I think Jimmy Carter's been a better after president. I think in the moment, Bill Clinton was.
There's a debate tonight. Can you tell us why Kamala Harris would make a better VP than Mike Pence again?
Listen, I would not want to be in a courtroom across from Kamala Harris, and I sure as heck wouldn't want to be on a debate stage across from her either. She's fierce. She understands what people are going through, and she's a great person. She sends me a text message from time to time, say, make sure you're eating right, make sure you do a little exercise, take care of yourself, and hug those boys for me, and I really appreciate that.
How much money did you raise in the third quarter?
I don't know. We will find out on October 15th.
All right, my actual last question is mustard, ketchup based,
Oh,
or
come
vinegar
on.
based?
Come on. I grew up in Orangeburg. Earl Duke's barbecue, it is mustard based all the time. That's not to say that, my vinegar based folks, I love y'all too, because I'll eat it also, and I enjoy it. But I grew up mustard, and so I'm mustard until I close my eyes at last.
Very good. We thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.